Hey guys, it's me, Mrs. Vogel. I've seen a lot of celebrities lately reading to kiddos with some of their favorite books. And I realized as I'm looking through all the posts that a lot of them are younger picture books. And when we get up into, fourth, fifth, sixth grade, it's not cool listening about Peppa Pig or Olivia or the very hungry caterpillar, right? So we want to listen to something a little bit more grown up. This here is one of my favorite books. It's called Ruby Holler. It's by Sharon Creech. A good friend of mine when I taught fifth grade introduced me to this book, and I've been reading it every year to my students since. Now this year I'm teaching sixth grade math, so it's not as easy for me to find time to read a big old chapter book. So I think what I've decided to do is I'm just gonna read a few chapters every day and try to post those each day so that you guys can keep with me and read Ruby Holler, one of my favorite books, with me each day. It's fun to listen while you work, so feel free to put your earbuds in and do your homework and listen to the story of Ruby Holler at the same time. So without further ado, Ruby Holler. Chapter 1, The Silver Bird. Dallas leaned far out of the window, his eyes fixed on a bird flying lazily in the distance. Sun slanted through the clouds above as if a spotlight were aimed on the bird. A silver bird, thought Dallas. A magical silver bird. The bird turned suddenly, veering south over the small town of Boxton, toward a faded yellow building and the window from which Dallas leaned. Dallas stretched his arms out. "Here!" he called. "Over here!" The bird swooped toward him and then rose up over the building, high into the air, over the alley and the train tracks and the dried-up creek. Dallas watched it rise on the air currents over one brown hill and then another until it disappeared. He tried to follow it in his mind. Do you guys do that too, where you try and follow things in your mind and play the movie? I do that all the time. He imagined it flying on until it spied a narrow green valley, a scooped-up basin with a creek looping and winding its way over the center. He pictured it swooping down from the sky into the basin in the hills to this place where cool breezes drifted through the trees and where the creek was so clear that every stone on its bottom was visible. Maybe the silver bird had flown home. "Get out of that window!" a voice shouted from below. "No leaning out of windows!" Dallas leaned a little further out and called down to Mr. Trepid, "Did you see that silver bird?" "Get out of that window, or you're going to join your sister down here pulling weeds," Mr. Trepid threatened. Dallas spotted his sister Florida inching her way along the sidewalk, wrenching clumps of weeds and grass and dirt from the ground. "Putrid weeds," Florida snarled, heaving a clod of dirt over her shoulder. Dallas watched as the clod landed on Mr. Trepid's back, and as the man scuttled over to Florida and whacked her on the head. Dallas wished the silver bird would return and snare Mr. Trepid and carry him up high over the town, and then drop him splat in the middle. Chapter 2, The Boxton Creek Home. Boxton was a tired town, a neglected place that looked as if it was in danger of collapsing in on itself. A tangle of old homes and shacks clustered around small stores and buildings that had seen better days. One of those buildings was the Boxton Creek Home for Children, a ramshackle house that tilted toward the train tracks and hills beyond. In this building lived the bungling managers, Mr. and Mrs. Trepid, their assistant, Morgan, and 13 children ranging in age from 6 months to 13 years. The two oldest children in the Boxton Creek Home were twins, Dallas and Florida. They were tall for their age, dark-haired and dark-eyed, with sturdy frames and a rough edge and unkempt look about them. Dallas was the quieter of the two, and the one more inclined to daydream, while Florida was loud and squirmy, with her mouth full of words bursting out and her face full of expression, flashing from surprise to disgust in an instant. The managers of the home, Mr. and Mrs. Trepid, were middle-aged, cranky and tired, and growing stiff and cold as winter-bound trees. They believed in rules, and their rules were posted on doorways and in hallways and above every child's bed. There were general rules, kitchen rules, bathroom rules, and stairway rules, and basement rules, and outside rules, and upside down rules, and upstairs rooms and downstairs rules, and clothing rules, and washing rules, and cleaning rules, rules upon rules upon rules. If we didn't have rules, Mr. Trepid liked to say, everything would be chaos. If we didn't have rules, his wife would say, these children would eat us alive. Since Dallas and Florida had lived in the Boxton Creek home longer than any of the other children there, they knew all the rules. They also knew the punishment for disobeying the rules. And they knew them well because they had broken every rule in the Boxton Creek home many times. How can we live every day of our lives without running or shouting or throwing or talking or dropping or spilling? Dallas had once asked Mr. Trepid. Thinking corner, 2 hours, was Mr. Trepid's reply. As he sat in the dark corner of the basement, Dallas imagined a broad field rimmed with trees. And in that imaginary field, he ran and shouted and threw sticks and mud. And when he was tired, he lay down in the green grass and felt himself getting smaller and smaller until he was a little baby lying in the grass. And someone with a sweet face leaned down and wrapped him in a white blanket. When Florida was caught breaking one of the rules, she was more likely to argue and, in result, earn extra punishments. She could not sit still, could not walk when her feet wanted to run, and so on a regular basis, she'd be running down the hall, and Mrs. Trepid's long, skinny arm would dart out from the doorway, snare Florida, and lead her to the nearest copy of the rules. What does that say? Mrs. Trepid demanded. Florida squinted at the sign. No stupid running? It does not say that, Mrs. Trepid said, urging Florida's face closer to the sign. Read it again. No stinking stupid running? Down to the basement. 2 hours in the thinking corner. That's stupid. Followed by 2 hours of floor scrubbing. Putrid. Followed by 2 hours of weed pulling. Dallas and Florida had racked up hundreds of hours in the thinking corner, the damp, dark, cobweb corner of the basement. They had worn the scratchy, I've been bad shirts, shoveled manure, crawled across fields of pulling weeds. They had peeled potatoes, scrubbed pots and floors, washed windows, hauled boxes, and broken furniture. Good hard thinking and good hard work never hurt anybody, Mr. Trepid would say. Mr. Trepid, who was a short, squat man with an awkward walk, like a crab scuttling across the ocean floor, did not particularly like thinking or working himself. But he firmly believed that these were good things of children. The home was a misfit operation, lost over the years in a larger system. Funds dribbled in, but social workers no longer came to check in. Health workers, building inspectors no longer came to inspect the building. There was no longer a doctor on staff or secretarial help. It was run solely by the Trepids, with the help of their overworked assistant, Morgan, who referred to herself as Chief Gopher. Still, the Boxton Creek home was as much a home as Dallas and Florida knew. On the front of the building, faded yellow paint curled in strips like peeling skin. Behind the main building, A string of smaller cubes had been added in a crooked path out the back. Dallas thought it looked like a string of mismatched boxcars laid end to end, and Florida thought it looked like a dragon with its huge mouth at the front door, waiting to swallow up children who entered it. When children first came to Boxton Creek home, they stayed in one of the bigger rooms in front, but gradually, as the months and years went by, if they'd not been placed elsewhere, they were shunted farther and farther back to the dark, low-ceilinged, airless rooms at the tail of the house. "Rotation," Mr. Trepid called it. "Rotation!" Children came and went. Some were taken in by foster families or adopted. A few ran away but were inevitably returned. One died in his bed whispering, "Who am I? Who am I?" And although Mr. and Mrs. Trepid had tried their best to move Dallas and Florida out, or rather, as Mrs. Trepid explained to them, to find you a lovely home, the twins were always brought back to the big front door by exasperated adults. "Troubled twins," these exasperated adults would say. "Nothing but trouble." In turn, Dallas and Florida had come to think of most adults as troubled grown-ups, for that had been their experience. That most grown-ups they'd encountered were short-tempered, impatient, and quick to punish. They had no way of knowing that there were foster parents and adopting parents who were kind and loving and generous and forgiving. In the narrow world of Dallas and Florida, an adult was someone to escape. Over the years, Dallas and Florida had been squeezed back in the back of the Boxton Creek home until they'd come to the end of it, where two cubicles huddled side by side. In each were a narrow, lumpy bed, a slim dresser, and rammed up close to the bed, a closet. A single bare bulb dangled from the ceiling. And at night, Dallas and Florida listened to the wail of the freight trains making their way through Boxton and onto where? To other places? Far and wide. To beautiful places, peaceful ones, friendly ones. Dallas and Florida had a plan. They would not be in the Boxton Creek home forever. They were going to jump on that night freight train and ride out of town soon. So that's the first two chapters of Ruby Holler. What do you think's going to happen next? Do you think they'll get on a night freight train? Do you think they're going to get out of town? Do you think they'll be adopted? What clues did you use in the story to come up with that prediction? I hope you guys join me tomorrow for the next part of Ruby Holler. Till next time, guys. See you later.